All right, everybody ready to dive in. We're tackling a big one today, immigration. It's everywhere this election, obviously. And we're cutting through all the noise to see where Harris and Trump really stand. We've got 5 sources lined up, and let me tell you, they do not hold back.
No, not at all. I mean, you've got record border crossings, something like 2.5 million encounters, people fleeing some really desperate situations. But at the same time, you've got the war in Ukraine straining resources, and the cost of living is making immigration a huge economic issue. It's a tense situation.
And I think it's important to remember we're not just talking about numbers on a page. These are human beings, families, individual stories. One of the sources even mentioned a family who sold everything they owned to come here, risked it all for a shot at something better.
Yeah, absolutely. It really personalizes it, doesn't it? And that's exactly why it's so important to really dig into what each candidate is actually proposing, beyond the slogans. We're talking about real lives here.
Speaking of slogans, let's talk about Harris's comprehensive reform, that earned pathway to citizenship idea. Sounds good on paper, but what does that mean for, say, a dreamer? Or a family with one citizen, one non-citizen spouse? These are complicated situations.
Right, you hit it. It's about how policy actually translates into people's lives. And with Harris, a lot of the sources point to her focus on what causes migration in the first place, not just the border itself. In fact, one source even brought up her work with undocumented farm workers. They even mentioned her pushing for health care access and fair wages for them.
Interesting. Makes you wonder how much that experience working with Biden really shaped her stance. Did it live up to the hype?
Now, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Voters have to decide if what she's saying matches what she's done, what's really happening. And speaking of reality checks, we got to talk about Trump's approach.
Buckle up, because this is where it gets interesting. One source actually called it déjà vu, but more extreme. And given his history, the travel ban, the wall, safe to say things could get pretty intense.
Intense might be putting it lightly. Several sources suggest he's going even further this time, talking about even larger deportations. He's really hammering that illegal immigration message.
So potentially millions of people impacted by these policies. But here's something that stood out to me. Some of the sources pointed out that his claims about immigration and crime, the data doesn't really back that up. One study even found lower crime rates in places with lots of immigrants.
Exactly. You can't just take anyone's word for it, even a presidential candidate's. You got to look at the facts, the data, think for yourself.
For sure. And on that note, this little detail about Trump's plans really jumped out at me. He wants to limit birthright citizenship. That's huge.
Huge is an understatement.
Yeah.
I mean, that could fundamentally change how we even define American citizenship. Really makes you realize both these candidates, in their own ways, are pushing for massive changes to how America handles immigration.
So we've got Harris, who seems to be going for a more open, reform-focused approach, and then Trump doubling down on stricter control, maybe even harsher policies. But how does this translate to everyday life for people? Your wallet, your community, your future.
And that's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
These aren't just abstract political debates. They affect every single American.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to unpack as we go deeper into this.
Yeah.
Going through these sources, it really struck me how closely tied each candidate's economic plans are to their stance on immigration. Like Trump's talking tariffs again.
Yeah.
Those foreign goods we all buy, what happens when those get more expensive? It affects everything.
Yeah, it's like a ripple effect, isn't it? One minute it's a policy decision, the next minute your morning coffee just doubled in price. It really shows you how connected everything is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not even just within the U.S.,
Yeah.
A few of the sources talked about how our immigration policies affect how other countries see us. Like the situation with Ukraine, how much aid we can give. It's all tied together.
So you've got the economy, you've got foreign policy, and of course, people's actual lives all caught up in this. Makes you wonder, with so much at stake, what are they not telling us? The sources were pretty revealing, but there were definitely some gaps.
That's the thing about campaign promises, right? They don't always give you the whole picture. Neither candidate is exactly spelling out how they'll pay for all these changes to the immigration system. And we're talking potentially trillions of dollars here. Where's that money coming from? Taxpayers. Cuts to other programs? And what about unintended consequences? More bureaucracy. Longer wait times. These are important questions.
It's like they skipped the fine print and went straight for the big, bold headlines. But as we know, those don't always line up with reality. And speaking of reality, I noticed a big difference in how Harris and Trump talk about immigration. It's like two totally different stories, two very different ideas about what America should be.
It's a battle of narratives, for sure, and they're both using strong language to try and win people over.
Yeah.
Trump's going back to his usual playbook, using fear and anxiety, migrant crime wave, open borders, that kind of thing. It's meant to make people feel like it's an emergency, maybe even scare them a little.
And it works, right? It creates this image of a country under threat, really raises the stakes.
Exactly. That kind of loaded language, it makes it really hard to have a nuanced conversation. Shuts down debate, boils everything down to us versus them.
Which is almost never how the real world actually works.
Never. And that's why I find Harris's approach to language really interesting. She's using a different tactic, one that focuses on shared values, on compassion. You hear her talk about comprehensive immigration reform, about creating an earned pathway to citizenship. It's less about fear, more about finding common ground.
Definitely a softer touch. But is it enough? I mean, will it resonate with voters who might be drawn to a more drastic message? It's like she's asking people to choose hope over fear.
$1 million question, right? Can unity and reform really break through when everything feels so divided? We'll have to see. But we can't just focus on the words, right? At the end of the day, it's the policies, the concrete actions that are going to make a difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. And look, both of them, no matter their approach, they're working within a system that's pretty messed up to begin with. The U.S. immigration system, it's a mess of outdated laws, conflicting rules, decades of political games. Even with the best intentions, fixing that is a huge challenge.
Like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded.
Right.
On a unicycle. Like Harris talks about supporting dreamers, right?
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like? What specific laws is she proposing? How will she get it through all the political roadblocks? The sources are pretty quiet on those details.
And then you've got Trump promising these mass deportations, stricter border control, even changing birthright citizenship. But again, where are the specifics? How much will it cost? How long will it take? What will it do to our economy, our relations with other countries? We just don't know.
It's easy to get caught up in the big promises, the rhetoric. But we can't just take their word for it. We need details. We need to separate the campaign slogans from actual workable plans, because neither one of them is offering a quick fix, a magic solution. This is too complicated, too deeply rooted for that.
No magic wands, got it. But with all this uncertainty, all the politics, and the very real problems with the system, there's got to be some hope, right?
There's always hope. One thing that really struck me as I read these sources is that even with all the division in politics right now, there's still some common ground on immigration. Like, both candidates have said they want to make legal immigration easier, less bureaucratic.
Which would be huge for people stuck in limbo, dealing with all that paperwork and legal stuff. It's a good sign.
It is. And it seems like they both agree we need better border security, although how to do that, well, that's another conversation.
Right, because what one calls enhanced security, the other calls violating civil liberties. It's a tough balance to strike. But still, at least they agree on something, right? That's got to count for something.
Definitely. Means the conversation's not over. There's still room for compromise, for finding solutions that work for everyone.
So maybe it's not all doom and gloom then. But I think it's safe to say immigration is going to be a big deal for a long time, probably shaping how we talk about politics for years to come.
It's bigger than just politics, though. It's really about who we are as a country. We were built by immigrants, yet here we are still figuring out who we are, who we want to be. And as the world gets smaller, as more people move around the globe, these questions are only going to get bigger.
It's like we're at a crossroads, right? Do we hold on to that image of America as a melting pot, a place of refuge? Or do we turn inward, shut people out?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's not just up to the politicians to decide. It's on all of us as citizens, as voters, because the choices we make about immigration today, they're going to echo for generations.
So to everyone listening, what does this all mean for you? What should you be thinking about as you try to make sense of this whole immigration debate?
More than anything, don't just take anyone's word for it. Stay informed, be critical of what you hear, and dig deeper. Don't just read the headlines. Look at the actual policies. Think about the real-world impacts and listen to the stories of the people who are actually living this.
You know, going through all this, one thing that really sticks with me is just the human cost. It's easy to get lost in the policy weeds, the economics of it all, but these are real people we're talking about, real lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, those 2.5 million border encounters, each one is a story. Families risking everything, kids escaping unimaginable situations, parents just trying to give their kids a chance. That's the human face of immigration. Those are the stories we need to remember.
And those are the stories that often get lost in the political back and forth, right? We hear about border security, about the economic impact, but we don't always hear from the people actually living it.
Exactly. which is why it's so important to seek those stories out. Look beyond the policy papers, and listen to immigrants themselves, their families, because those stories remind us that this isn't just some abstract political debate. It's about real lives, real hopes and dreams.
One of the sources even told a story about a family that traveled for weeks, months even, with practically nothing just to get here. It really makes you think about the kind of desperation that drives people to make that journey, to risk everything for something better.
It really does. Makes you question what you would do in that situation. What would it take for you to leave everything behind, to try and build a better future for your family?
Big questions. And on a bit of a different note, I did notice a lot of talk about technology in the sources, especially when it comes to Trump's plans. He wants to increase security on the border, but we're talking drones, facial recognition, the works. Feels kind of futuristic, doesn't it? Like, are we about to have robots patrolling the border?
It's a whole other layer to this, and it's tricky. I mean, some people say it's the only way to really secure the border, to stop what they call illegal immigration. But then you've got others saying it's a huge invasion of privacy, that it could be used to target people unfairly.
Because technology isn't perfect, is it? It can be biased, it can be misused. And when you're talking about something as life-changing as immigration, even a small mistake can have huge consequences.
Exactly. So then you have to ask, who controls this technology? Who's accountable if something goes wrong? These are things we need to be thinking about.
It's like we're stepping into a whole new world of immigration enforcement, and I'm not sure we're ready for it.
And that's why it's so important to talk about it, to debate it, to really think about the implications, because the choices we make today about technology and immigration are going to last for generations.
For sure. And before we wrap this up, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier. How our immigration policies affect how other countries see us? Because this isn't just an American issue, right?
Not at all. I mean, the U.S. has always been seen as a place of hope for immigrants, a place to build a new life. But recently, with all the talk about stricter policies, about closing the border, it's hurt that image.
It's like we're at a turning point. Are we going to keep going down this road, building walls, turning people away, or are we going to remember our roots as a nation of immigrants? Embrace that diversity.
That's the million-dollar question. It gets to the very core of who we are as a nation. And it's not just up to the politicians to answer it. It's up to all of us.
So as we come to the end of our deep dive here, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
Don't just take our word for it or anyone's word for it. Read those sources. Think for yourself. Talk to people. Listen to their stories. Because immigration is complicated and there's no easy answers. But if we talk to each other, if we listen, we can build a system that's more fair, more humane for everyone.
It's about remembering that these are real people we're talking about. Their lives, their hopes, their dreams. It matters.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The future of immigration, it's still being written. And every single one of us has a role to play in how that story ends.
So keep asking those tough questions, stay engaged, and keep those conversations going. Because together, we can build a future where immigration isn't a problem, but a chance. A chance to build something better together. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Absolutely. Until next time.